It has been 50 years since the majority of the human population had been struck down on Z-Day. Here in the studio, we have Robin Sontag, now 75 years old, and one of the brave women who rose up after Z-Day, who managed to help create the foundation for the civilization we enjoy now. We have called her in today to tell us about the world immediately following what we now call the zombie apocalypse, and what she and our other founders did to survive in the dangerous world that followed. This is a tribute to human spirit and tenacity, and it'll be used as a teaching tool to show future generations just what happened when...
Anyway, before we start, I have a question for you.
Well, yes, of course. You can ask me anything.
This is for educational purposes, right? As in, shown in pre-apprenticeship schools.
Well, as far as I know, yes.
Then, will I be censored at all?
Censored? What do you mean?
Will that be cut out?
I really don't know.
Because I signed up for this. Even gave you some of the pictures you wanted. You want to tell me the stories, so I will tell the goddamn story as it happened. Or you can keep those photos and dub over them however you will please.
Well, I'll see that your integrity is kept, but please try and refrain from swearing if you can.
Fine. I'll try. Where do you want me to start?
We'll start with Z-Day. Where were you when it happened?
It happened fast. Real fast. I was driving back to my parents' home to see them for the holidays. At the time, I was a student studying psychology. They lived in Rosenberg, which is a small city outside of Houston. It's kind of hard to explain to anyone born after Z-Day. Rosenberg was part of Houston to outsiders, but any native Houstonian needed to be told that to figure out what part of the town you were really from. Those names, they don't mean much now, do they? Hell, the stuff I was being taught as a student hasn't done anything for me in 50 years. Of course, I had no way of knowing that. You have no idea just how specialized jobs had to be with a population thousands of times the size of the one we now have. Hell, 10-year-olds can now take better care of themselves than full-grown adults from before. You guys really won't ever get... never mind, I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's fine. Please continue.
Okay. Like I said, I was driving along a stretch of I-45 between Houston and Shiner. It's funny, had I been just a few miles north or south, I don't think I'd be alive today.
And what happened while you were driving?
Keep in mind, I didn't know this at first. Some of these details we pieced together later by comparing stories and observations. What I'm sure of, though, is that when it started, it happened too fast for any real preparation. In short, everyone, and by that I mean every man, woman, and child, about 7 billion human beings got sick all at the same time. Was it transmitted quickly through the air or by something that was timed to let out into the world's water supply? Maybe it was radio waves or judgment from a higher power, I don't know. If it can happen again, it hasn't since, so honestly, I just don't know. Like I said, I was one of the lucky ones.
Well, what was it like?
It sucked. You know that feeling you get just before you throw up?
Yes, I do.
Well, that time I didn't get it. I just started throwing up. It got all over my steering wheel, my windshield. I pulled my car over, but passed out before I could open my door. Turns out that, too, was a factor that kept me alive.
Could you describe a little more about what happened around the world on that day?
I can try. We still have no idea how many people were killed outright. Our estimates range from about 1/4 to 9/10 of the population. That's a pretty big margin for error, especially out of roughly 7 billion. I know, but everyone that lived through it had two things in common. We were isolated and secured when we passed out, and we woke up 2 days later.
And the rest? Those that did not wake up in the 2 days?
They also fall into two categories. Those that were killed while passed out, and those that rose as zombies and killed them. The latter were changed by the thing that made everyone sick. I've always figured this is why so few people survived. The zombies got a head start, eating people who could have survived had they been somewhere safe when they lost consciousness. Also, while I'm sure the zombie to human ratio is the same everywhere, 4 zombies pressing on a door won't have near the force that 40 would. In other words, people in bigger towns were at a much higher risk than those in places like Schulenburg.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened had only a small percentage of the population passed away during that time?
Passed away? For the next 10 years after that day, nobody had the luxury of passing away. Death came either from being ripped to pieces and eaten, or mercy killed by the people that remained, like me. Passing away resumed only after we had finally settled in the relative safety here in Shiner. Chuck Blaze did not pass away. He was killed. Eliza Johns, she passed away in her bed, peacefully welcoming death and not having it surround her and tear her limb from limb.
Oh, I'm sorry. I only meant to say...
Forget it. I sometimes have a tendency to think about how such things could have been. The bottom line is that everyone that survived did so because they were somewhere safe when the dead reanimated and killed those out in the open. So I came too, still in my car, feeling hungover, sore and still all over and covered in my own mess. My eyes were still trying to focus when I heard tapping on my window. I looked up and the fog of a 2-day-long nap started to lift.
Was it a zombie?
First one I'd ever seen. He was probably in his 50s, although it was tough to say even that early in the decomposition. He was wearing a hat with an American flag on it that said, "Back-to-back World War Champs," and a filthy flannel shirt covered in blood and other fluids that may or may not have originally belonged to him. His clouded-over buttery eyes were pressed against the window and his fists lightly tapped it. It's funny, actually, now that I think about it. To this day, he's the only one of them I encountered that I can completely recall just from memory. Everyone after that's just a featureless blur.
Well, what did you do?
Well, what would you have done?
It kind of depends. Is he the only zombie around?
We'll say he was.
And your car, did it run?
No. I should have mentioned that my car battery had passed away because I'd left it on.
Oh, then I would have dispatched him in a method that would have kept me safe. If no weapons were available and the car wasn't working, I would have opened up the passenger door and the driver's side door. When the zombie crawled into one end, I would have climbed out the other, closed that door, and then quickly closed the other one from the outside, trapping it inside.
Good plan. Simple and effective. You have a dead car and a dead guy trying to get you. Trap it in the car and suddenly you don't have to worry about the dangers of hand-to-hand combat or the chance that it could follow you and alert other zombies to your location from its moaning. Crack the window a bit and zombies all around would be drawn to the moans of your prisoner and not to you while escaping. Even in the later stages when they can move a bit faster, this plan would definitely work.
Well, it is a pretty simple solution.
And a solution I would not have thought about at all 50 years ago. Understand, I was trapped in a car filled with my own puke that wouldn't move. I had a zombie tapping on the glass trying to get to me. He was not yet limber or strong enough to get to me, but I didn't know that at the time. My situation seemed pretty straightforward. Some guy, possibly a zombie, was trying to get me and my car wasn't running. I had to get away from him.
So what did you do?
Well, I tried to hide at first. I climbed in the back seat, laid down, hoping he would have lost interest. After a couple of minutes, I realized hiding was not going to work because he continued tapping on the glass in that same rhythmic pattern. I realized the car wasn't going anywhere, neither was what's outside. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, there's nothing in the car to take care of either of these problems. I remember before starting the drive to my parents, I'd even cleaned my car inside and out so I would not have to listen to my mom complain about me living like a pig. I say this because instead of the various things that I normally kept in my back seat out of laziness that could potentially work as weapons, all I had was about a week's worth of clothes and a pair of jumper cables. I slung the bag over my shoulder and opened the back passenger door. The zombie immediately reacted, shuffling towards me, moaning in a way that chilled me to the core. When that happened, I went from scared to terrified. I took the jumper cables and swung them as hard as I could at the zombie while it advanced at a snail's pace. They wrapped around him several times and were about as effective as that sounds. He moaned a second time and I turned and ran as fast as I could. He followed me at a slow shuffle, but I didn't see him again until I'd met Chuck. By then I was a little more in control of myself, but I suppose this is where you want me to sign off?
Yes, this will work. Thank you very much for your time.